The preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Good evening. My name is Robert Gilson. I direct the School of the Arts here at the 92nd Street Y. Thank you for braving the snow to join us this evening. It's quite amazing, about 7:30, it started to change. One of the reasons that I stand up here at the beginning of these is that it gives me a chance to pitch School of the Arts programs. And so again, I'm going to do that tonight. This evening, as this is going on and Janos Starker is performing in the concert hall, Maya Claire Garrison and Mzawa Dance are starting the beginning of our Harkness Dance Center series here at the Y at Playhouse 91. It's a 5-week series with 5 different companies. You should have received a flyer in your in what we handed to you this evening, and it's really a great series. The Playhouse 91 is a great place to see dance. Next week, Muna Tseng and Peng Chong will be here. And they'll be performing the very poetic Slut for Art, which is based on the life of Tseng Kwang Chi, who is Muna Singh's brother, is a photographer. And then the following week will be Donald Byrd and the group, followed by Kornfeld Dance, and finally the Eric Hawkins Dance Company will be here. So we hope that some of you are fans of dance and that you will join us. This evening marks the first of this year's Artist Vision series. The next person in the series will be Philip Pearlstein on March 18th. Rachel Whiteread will be here on April 22nd, and Lorna Simpson will be here on May 13th. And we hope we'll see you back for some of those as well. The moderator for Artist Visions is Robert Storr. Mr. Storr is a curator in the Department of Painting and Sculpture at the Museum of Modern Art. His exhibitions curated from MoMA include last year's Chuck Close exhibition, last summer's Tony Smith retrospective, and Willem de Kooning, The Late Paintings. Mr. Storr is an author of monographs on Philip Guston, Chuck Close, and Louise Bourgeois. He is a regular contributor to many journals and publications, including Art in America, where his recent interview with Charles Ray appeared in the January issue. The evening will go as follows. Mr. Storr will come out and do a brief introduction of Mr. Ray. Mr. Ray will then show slides of his work, and then there will be a discussion between Mr. Storr and Mr. Ray about Mr. Ray's work and ideas. And toward the end of that discussion, there will be an opportunity for the audience to pose questions, and we encourage you to do so. So with no further ado, please help me to welcome Robert Storr, and thank you for coming.
Hi. As Bob said, this is the first of a group. And as you can tell from the artists represented, this series tries, as indeed I try to do in the work I do at the Modern, to have a mixed grill and to have artists representing diverse generations, diverse ways of going about what they do, and diverse reasons for going about what they do. I, in fact, see connections among them, not obvious ones, and sometimes I discover them in the course of working on shows or in having conversations and so on. And I hope that the cumulative effect of attending these lectures will have somewhat the same impact. I never think that art is a matter of teams contending, but rather of a much more open, fluid kind of conversation that happens through work and through situations. Just in terms of the formalities, we really do encourage people to ask questions from the audience. Don't be shy. Don't discount your question because you think somebody else might know the answer and it's just that you don't. Please do ask what you want, but try and make it, 1, audible so that we can know what's being asked, and 2, try to make it brief enough so that there's a chance really to answer a number of different questions in the time allotted. It's my nature not to do terribly long introductions, but I would like them to be nonetheless enthusiastic, and particularly in this case. I was asked, I think about 4 or 5 months ago by Art News which exhibitions had made the most impression on me in the previous year. Now, given that I'd done the shows that Bob mentioned plus the Danheiser collection, I had a certain vested interest, I guess, in this. But in fact, the one that had made the most impression on me was Charles Ray's show. And I was told by them that I couldn't do that one since it was a museum show, and anyway, lots of other people had picked up on it. But in fact, it was the show that struck the deepest chord and left me with the most to think about of any of the New York shows that I saw. And it did so in a context where I'd already been familiar with a large part of the work in question, seeing it in international exhibitions, seeing it at the gallery where he shows here in New York, Feature Gallery, and elsewhere. But it was the cumulative effect of that show that brought out characteristics that I had not been aware of or that I had been only subliminally aware of. And particularly that there was, amidst a great deal of highly sophisticated if you will, thinking and perceiving an emotional content, a sort of a temper to the show that was not automatically apparent from the individual works seen in isolation. And I think probably some of this will come out this evening, things related to that. But for those of you who did not see it, it's very too bad, and I strongly encourage you to do some homework and work backwards, because not only was it a show that made an impression on the likes of curators, but it was a show that was much discussed by other artists in town. And this is a case of somebody who's been working at a considerable distance from New York and making a deep impact on a world which is not always that hospitable. So I would like to introduce Charlie in that way as somebody who absolutely and totally got my attention and that of quite a lot of other people. Hold on.
Well, thank you for coming to my talk. I was going to talk for just a couple of minutes about how I started making sculpture. I was born in Chicago in 45, and so I was in Chicago in the 50s. And like a lot of artists, I had a dyslexia, and so in grammar school I had trouble, with the reading and writing and intellectually expressing myself in high school. Because of some of these problems, I was sent to a boys' military school in Aurora, Illinois, that was was like a place that you don't get a horse when you go to. It was very Spartan and really very rigid and very rough, and it had all kinds of rules. I never really felt good until the summers, and I sailed a lot and did a lot of not organized sports, but outdoor activities, tree climbing and sailing and just sort of goofing around outdoors. And after high school, I did an outward bound class. So I was kind of going in that direction. I felt that I could kind of find myself in relationship to the world through, kind of a physical activities. Also was always sort of involved in art. And the only thing I wanted to do in college, when I went to college, was to make art. And so the reason I went through all that, because when I went to undergraduate school at the University of Iowa, and a man by the name of Roland Brenner was teaching there for a year when I first went, and he turned out to be kind of my mentor and lifelong friend. He had been a student of Anthony Carl's at St. Martin, so he was teaching in this really sort of rigid, abstract, painted steel sculpture, a la high formalism, a la St. Martin's, Anthony Carl. But, in retrospect of his relationship to it, and certainly mine, was much more kind of cargo cult. We just sort of like took it without really understanding it. But what made sense was for me, and why I was in the right time at the right place, was because of my military school training. There were these very rigid formal rules, like how you made your bed every day, what time you got up, you marched every place, inspection twice a day. So there were these rules that, I didn't do well at, but at least I understood. And in this type of sculpture, there were very rigid formal rules about what could be done and what couldn't. And on the other end of it, it was very kind of behavioralistic. You went to the studio and just sort of, it was like climbing a mountain almost. It was a physical activity, and the sculptures were like punctuation points in an activity. I was sort of taught to cannibalize sculptures when they were done, and it was more kind of your relationship to the work, what happened over a year's period, than working for any working towards any one particular piece. But it was the first time in my life that I could express myself intellectually by kind of being involved physically and kind of sequencing these materials. So I sort of combined my interest in mountain climbing and outdoor stuff with my military school background, these sort of formal rules. It was just sort of the right genre for me. I got really, really lucky. And I spent moving through these things, different kind of genres of sculpture out of that, but always sort of with a sort of a formal background. And I'm going to start with a group of sculptures that I made when I moved to California in 1981. And I had kind of gotten into a crisis, which I do every few years in my life, and had sort of found that my artwork was mediating my experiences, and I was kind of making metaphors, metaphorical sculptures, and it was almost like this really sort of conservative Christian idea that like Jesus is a mediator between the individual and the absolute. So like sort of banging into this idea or making this art that really was taking me further away from my relationship with making. And it all one aspect of sculpture that's always bothered me. It looks like Christmas morning. You'd walk into your art show or to your studio, and all these sort of pieces of candy are around. And I was kind of up against that and feeling actually really sort of unhappy with my work. And then an event happened. My brother died, and I tried to make a work, kind of commemorating that, or dealing with my feelings about that. And it seemed so far from any kind of reality of the situation that I just sort of really went into sort of a tailspin. And I moved to California and just didn't know what to do. But years earlier, I had used my own body in some sculptures, and naked or whatnot, and that always seemed to work. So I thought, like, almost juvenilely, that had worked, 15 years earlier, 10 years earlier, so I tried again. And that's the series I'm going to start with. And someone could lower the lights and turn on the slide. I guess I click it. No? Yeah. And the guy upstairs will focus it. This was the first piece in this group of work, and what it is, it's from 1981. That's me in the box. And when I made it, I wasn't really thinking how I would show it or what I would do with it, though I was really kind of uninterested in the performative aspect of it. So I was really thinking of my body as just like another sculptural material, like as if it was, it certainly was imagistic, but kind of almost inert. And what's happening with it is the box is split in half right here. It's a steel box. And when you look through a crack in a material, you can see light through it. And so when you would come in the room, first it would look like a Dwayne Hansen or something, like these limbs were made out of fiberglass. And you'd see they were sort of twitching or whatnot. And as you walked around it, you'd see this light through it, and my body got lost in the shadows in the bottom of the box, and you couldn't quite locate me, and that had this sort of quality, sort of disconcerting. And at this time, again, I didn't know how I would show them, so when I would invite people over to my studio, and my assistant, we'd kind of wait, and we'd see the car pull up, and he'd quick put me in it, and then like open the door, and let the critic or the gallery person or a friend come in and look at it. And then they'd leave, and he'd get me out of it. So there was a sort of awkward sort of denial that this work was, had any kind of performative quality to it. But what really interests me about it was it had this relationship to the magician's trick, where the magician saws the lady in half. And what interests me about that is there was a relationship to the audience that it's like the magician signs a contract with you, and you with him or her, and you're in cahoots. That you have to have this sort of social contract in order for that trick to work. And so there was that kind of quality in the work, that relationship to the viewer that interests me. These next two I'm showing because I thought that they didn't work. And this one, kind of had an illusion that, somehow it evolved into a worm or something and was like, in this pipe that was piercing the form. And this one was, the first one that I showed was called In Memory of Sadat, and it was because I thought it looked somewhat Egyptian, and it was done around the time Sadat had been executed. And this one, I bring that up because this was, I think it's out of focus, but it was made at the time of the Iranian Revolution, when it seemed like on the news every night people were being carried out in coffins and whatnot. And it was called Leak. And this one and the previous one, I really thought failed because they started to do exactly what I was trying not to do. If you look at the first piece, In Memory of Sadat, as a sculptural equation, what's metal and what's body and what's lost in the shadows, there's sort of an if you put it into an equation, it equals, what's steel and what's body equal each other, and sort of tension, something like generates out of the work. Where this one, the structure overwhelmed the body, and I felt it really quickly degenerated down into like a surrealist image. And with that image, reading of the image, all curiosity was lost because you kind of had a safe distance from it because the structure in the equation kind of overwhelmed the body. So there was no that kind of imagistic quality that gets generated out of it, brought like a safe distance to the viewing and an understanding. You could read it, oh yeah, that's like this weird image. And it sort of broke the curiosity or the liveliness of the work. And this I had read, when you have someone has a limb amputated, there's a phenomenon called the phantom limb. And it's quite painful, evidently, but if you pass a table, you might, with this phantom limb that's not there, reach for a beer. And it evidently is really quite painful. Also, like hands can itch that aren't there. And so this work was called The Phantom Limb, and it was kind of a relationship between my figure and the geometry, the architecture of the wedge. So when you first viewed it, it looked like the architecture was causing the distortion. But when you look after a few minutes and are kind of brought into it, you realize that the arm's too big, it's too much meat on it, and it would be about 6 inches too long. So then the question was, what was my arm doing in the wedge? But with the other figure. But it's really part of the problem with the structure was that I was trying to create this kind of tension between the body as persona or the body as object, and people would try to talk to me, and I'd have to just pretend I was mute, or and so that aspect was really unresolved and didn't work. And at this time, I was still just showing them privately. This I actually made after I saw the film Road Warrior, and it was a really kind of I was young, and it was really kind of a put together film and a kind of a sculptor's film, sort of. And what when you look at it, you don't get in the slide is kind of the physicality of it. You see here the sort of the formalism. But how the structure works is this is a fairly hefty steel pipe, and then it's torch cut, so it's neat, but you can really see the oomph of the steel and the weight of the steel. And this metal rod, which is about maybe 1.5 inches in diameter, passes through the pipe and passes through this cylinder, which is closed on both sides, almost like a stock. It has a U that clamps around my neck. And it too is torch cut. So there's kind of a weird, if you really think about it, looks like the rod might be passing through my head. But it was a really important work for me because it had another quality of that sculptural disjunction that David Smith and Carl often use, and that's sort of this radical change of point of view as you walk around a work. That a work kind of really flattens or changes radically as you move three-dimensionally around it. And this piece had this kind of formal elegance from this side, and everything's in balance. It was actually quite dangerous. If you bumped the pipe, like the whole thing could come down and my neck would be broken. So it had this delicateness. But when you walked around to the front of it, the whole thing flattened out, to almost be in an unspatial configuration. But you were left in this room with a naked guy, and in a very kind of formal art situation where you could like look at my dick or look at my tits or pimples on my stomach or look at my butt, sort of scan me in a way, in a situation that you were sort of supposed to, because you're looking at the art, but it's actually a body. So the work created a kind of uncomfortable, or maybe uncomfortable is the wrong word, but the actual work, the formal situation of the work created a social situation between the viewer and the work that was actually real in its sociology. And that, when I was working on these things, these weren't preconceived. I just had kind of formal intuition of directions I wanted to go, and I'd work with an assistant or have a cardboard cutout of my body, and I was actually working as if they were formal sculptures, changing things. Each piece would take 2, 3, 4 months, change things by ½ inch, stretch things out, kind of look for directions to go that had some kind of implications, and just sort of follow them, almost as if they were just painted abstract sculptures. This was called At the Table, and by now I was showing these works, and what I did is I would create in either the first exhibition I did, I rented a large warehouse and created 3 rooms with a hallway and a bench outside the hallway and 3 doors, and then they had back interconnected doors. And I thought it would be really awkward, but something else happened. I sent out an announcement that the exhibition would begin every hour on the hour, and you would come and there was someone at the door at a desk that would say, "Have a seat." You'd sit, and then the hour arrived, my assistant would open this door, and you'd go in, and I was in that Road Warrior piece. And you could spend some time looking at it, and if you were more than 10, 15 minutes, he would never kick you out. He might look at his watch or, scratch his throat or something, and so you'd go back out. And you'd sit back on a bench, you'd shut the door, and he'd quick take me down. Quick, we'd run around these back doors, he'd put me in the next piece. And I thought there'd be this really awkward kind of contraption, Rube Goldberg aspect, but what it did is it brought this narrative reading to the work, So the whole experience of looking at the 3 sculptures was like an expanded theater, where they were kind of like, one play with 3 acts, kind of. And it went from the sort of upright piece to another piece to that In Memory of Sadat. So it was sort of about this figure falling over and, to its back. The next exhibition I did, I created this architecture. I wanted to break that narrative, so I just had a waiting room and changed the piece every week. And I thought the architecture that I was making was very neutral, but in fact it was really Kafkaesque, and I was kind of subverting myself and not really confronting what I wanted to do sculpturally, but actually making a kind of expanded theater. Anyway, this piece was in one of the exhibition that changed once a week, and when you went into the room, you'd try to read a metaphor into the work. Again, the steel was very heavy and had a real kind of contrast to the figures, and you try to read a metaphor such as like the teacher, both tied to the same structure, or the serve, both like locked together in the same kind of social situation. But the more you try to do that, that kind of metaphorical reading would just sort of collapse on itself, and you would be stuck with like 2 naked guys in the room with you. And the reality of that situation would kind of destroy the meaning you were trying to read and create into the work. And I like that aspect of it quite a bit. This was called Gangrene, and there's another neurological illness that people get where they look at their hand and they jump, and they think that the hand belongs to somebody else, and they actually have to follow it from the tip of the fingers up to the shoulder to be assured that it's theirs. It's this uncanny feeling that they're reading a book and they see the hand on the edge of the book, and they think another person's touching the book. And I was interested in these kind of psychological structures, physiological structures, and I wanted to make the limb where the viewer would have to really, really work to stick it back on my body. So I wanted to make this limb, this arm, just sort of be more connected to the steel plate. You have to get this one just as focused as you can. Unfortunately, it's the slide that's out of focus, so it only goes so far. It's a little better than that, but That's probably it. That's good. But anyway, people would come and look at this thing and like look underneath it and just felt that I shaved my arm and painted it the same color that the steel bunk was painted, and this one is in backwards, unfortunately. Maybe I'll go it back if you can. I'm going to go back one. If you can flip that slide. Oh, can you flip? Can he hear me? Can you flip that one slide just right around? I have it in backwards. There, thank you. This one was one of the last of this series that I did, and the shelf came off the structure here. There's sort of a fine line and kind of two half circles. I kind of cut my hair real short and painted my face and head the same color as the shelf, the gas can, the tool case, and the flower vase. And it was kind of an interesting work, because when you entered the room, you first felt that I was like really super vulnerable, and that would sort of flip around, and I seemed like really powerful, and you seemed really like weak and vulnerable. Then you'd read a narrative, like my head would just move away from my body formally, and you'd read, start trying to make like a story from head, it would just drift away. And then all the flesh underneath it would just break that illusion. It'd go back to just a vertical figure again. And it was very similar to that Gestalt poster that's it looks either like a chalice or two silhouettes, or a rabbit or a duck, but you can't see it both ways. You can only see it one way. So what it did is when you went in the room with it, it just started jerking your head, it's like reading it one way then the other way and reverberating your relationship to it. And this is sort of an example of the architecture. This door is open. There'd be like a sign saying that it would start in every half hour or whatever. These benches. Again, when I was making them, I thought they were very neutral, and then it really freaked me out. I realized that they weren't. It was like I was recreating my military school. Some people looking at them. And this was the last one I did, and I never showed, and it just seemed sort of ridiculous. Like I was making sort of a signature style, like working with my body, and I was beginning to shave myself and paint myself with like house oil paints, and it just sort of it lost something. And this idea, I really realized I didn't want to do this sort of expanded theater. And so I went into kind of a crisis, and I broke up with my wife and moved to another area of the city, and started taking a lot of walks on the beach. And this was the first piece that came out of it. And for almost a year, every time I was in my studio, if you ever play like computer chess all day, then you try to like read a newspaper and you can't because the word is like jumping around like the chess thing. So every time I would look at a configuration, like an arm would pop out of it or a leg would pop out of it. And I thought I was sort of ruined or something. But I lived then near this beach by the airport, and it just so happened that the currents there washed up everything from the summer in the winter storm. So all these bottles and balls and different things washed up. So I was just sort of lost, and just basically spending my days with my dog at the beach, just sort of like out of it. And I thought I would be collecting these things for art, or to give myself something to do. And this came out of that actually, and it started out with maybe 100 different vessels on this table. What the idea was, it was called viral research, and there was a hole in every vessel, and then they're interconnected, so you just pour the liquid in one vessel and it flows out to all of them. But originally, there were like 100 vessels on here, and this kind of chemistry apparatus, which is something I did in grammar school, is I just, for like 8 years, just drew in my notebook this one big chemistry experiment. You know, it's sort of like a big doodle. Kids do it, I guess, like drawing skulls or something. But it had that aspect of these glass tube networks went all the way down to the floor. And what was hard for me, you know, the idea was the easiest part of it, but what, you know, this kind of interconnectivity of these vessels. But what took the year was like cutting this thing down every day, like removing another layer and taking vessels away, until eventually it became almost like, you know, had this sort of aspect. It was almost like a really kind of Morandi-esque, perfect formal still life, and using the network of tubes almost just to ground it. So it had this sort of transcendent still life with a sort of sophomoric physics of like liquid seeks its own level. There's that detail of it. And this was a piece called How a Table Works. And, you know, for a sculptor, even when they don't know it, maybe one of the most difficult things and most important things is a sculptor's relationship to the ground, you know, to gravity and to the floor. And sometimes the surface of the tabletop can become a substitute for that, and I think it had for me in these. And so what's happening is there's no plane on the top. The pieces are locked together. Well, I wanted to make like an expanded diagram, like a drawing of how a table actually works. A table is just a piece of plywood and 4 sticks till you put an object on it, and then it does its job. It becomes a table. So it's always sort of in this state, you know, it's like a social object. And I wanted to kind of diagram that or make that apparent. But the work of the piece was trying to remove the narrative or the meaning from being between the still life objects. The objects had to have a kind of tone, because that's impossible, but not to have that, but to not have your mind draw relationships between the objects, but to find the relationship between this. Like, it's as if the sculpture just had 3 elements: the still life, the table, and the rod that was connecting them all. And that's what was sort of my job, or what was really hard to do, and took me a really long time. This was a work called Ink Box, and it's a 3 foot by 3 foot steel box, open box, that I had welded together, then had a company grind really clean and smooth, and then I had it painted with black automobile lacquer, and then leveled it on the floor and filled it to the brim with 200 gallons of black newspaper ink that has the same gloss and kind of consistency as the sides of the box. So initially, I think this particular work resolved those works that I showed previously, the body works, that kind of had to do with kind of the vulnerability of the body and kind of a kinesthetic feeling of bodiness and you know, the sort of tension between the body as persona and body as sort of meat, or, you know, or as object. The idea of the illusion of this was you know, meant in the structure of the work to be sort of short-lived, and I wanted the word of mouth or your investigation of it to quickly sort of let that break away, and you to know that it was actually this box just teeming and right to the brim with black ink. And then there was this real urge to sort of disrupt it, to touch it. And once you touch it, you know, of course, overflows because it's right to the brim. And black newspaper ink is like, it never dries, because it's dries by absorption. It's just oil and carbon, and it's maybe the world's most messiest stuff. And so it really was sort of about this neurotic urge. You know, when you viewed it, it was almost like a campfire. People sort of would sit around it, and like a campfire, you know, I see boys around a bonfire. They're always like, you know, putting their hand over it and, you know, reaching into it, and, you know, but you really wanted to, you know, there's some deep inner urge to sort of disrupt this surface and to touch it, and then you're marred too because you know, can't get it off. And you all know you're not supposed to touch art anyway. But my brother, when I was little, slammed the car door on his finger on purpose. And when he was asked why he did it, he said it was because he wanted to see what it would feel like. or that same quality you have when you're on the edge of a cliff or a building, you kind of want to jump, but you know you're not going to, but you know another part of your body that's almost out of your control is sort of, you know, urging you, and it's sort of scary feeling that you're like right, you know, on the edge, and you might, you don't know. It's not that it's that dangerous to touch it, but I think that the structure of the work was kind of activating those urges, or, you know, was about that, kind of disrupting it. This was called Inkline, and there was a small hole in the ceiling and a small hole in the floor. I had once been at IHOP, the International House of Pancakes. I saw this kid had a jar of syrup. He was doing his pancakes, but he had jumped up on the table. He was like a 5-year-old. He was just screwing with his folks. It was, you know, like pouring it onto his plate like that. But from across the room, I saw, you know, the syrup had a viscosity, and the line didn't break, and it was just sort of like, you know, this really sort of disruptive thing this 4-year-old was doing, but then this like elegant kind of formal drip that was happening to it that was just like really, you know, burnt into me. And so I did this piece, and it again had this really sort of minimalist quality. It came for me, it's very figurative, and you know, it's like really easily disruptive. As you blow on it, or you know, it just misses the hole, and you know, it's broken, starts making a big mess really quick. But again, you have this urge to just put your hand into it and disrupt it. It's almost about the impossibility of making a perfect system. This piece was called Rotating Circle, and it's a 9-inch disc that's embedded kind of perfectly in a wall, mounted at my head height, and it spins so fast that it appears to be stationary. And it originated as another piece that I showed at a feature when it was in Chicago. That was like a 2-foot circle in the floor that did the same thing. And at that time I was feeling some other emotive something. I wanted to make a work that just had all of my angst, all of my anger, everything about me just like poured into this one place, but would be so poured in that it would just appear to be nothing. You know, I wanted to make something, in a sense, so abstract it became real, or so real it became abstract. When I made the one in Chicago, the fat that it seemed to have, it had this element of danger and location, and that seemed almost, for what I was trying to do, excessive, and you know, as extra. I wanted to even purify it or distill it more, and I didn't know how to do it. And later it occurred to me to put it in the wall, and to remove its location and the aspect of danger. And I don't know what, but slowly playing with different things, it became the size of my head, and it was really an important work for me, because I realized later that, you know, often the liveliness of the work might tap into psychological structures in myself. It's not necessarily about those structures, but I find like sculptural equivalents for them to create a kind of relationship you might have to the work. But I mean, it's obvious sometimes when you're talking to somebody, you know, they appear very placid and calm, but they're thinking like, you're the biggest fucking motherfucker I ever met in my life. I'm gonna fucking screw you. And you know it, but you don't know who's thinking that, or who's gonna get you, or you're thinking it, but you're appearing, yes, thank you, sir, thank you. You know, but inside your head, a whole nother kind of matrix of ideas and thoughts and emotions is occurring. So, you know, it had that quality. It was almost like a portrait, or almost like an icon of me that way. It was right at my height, my head. It was also sort of like a portal to another space. This I show because it was a sort of a failure. I was very interested in many people are and have been for all times, the kind of mind-body problem of having bodies, but you know, also being able to think, being physical and mental. And the initial idea of this is I think of a lot of my work, I take a lot of baths and find it really relaxing to think in the tub. And so it's a very big part of my life, the bathtub. And I thought, what would happen, could I, in my mind, just think so hard about taking a bath that one just appeared, and it would sort of be displaced in the world. But this tub is split in half at the high dirty water mark, and then there's a glass put in it, and it's filled with water. So it's, you know, like as the bath, but it's in, you know, almost a sort of pictorial displacement, and it's Baroque, and it leaks, and, you know, I thought it was really sort of a miserable attempt at this really complicated problem. And this is how it was, one way it was resolved. This was called, I can't really do the title, but 32 times 33 times 37 equals 32 times 35 times 35, where when you give the dimensions of the piece, the inside dimension is 2 inches too big. And so the box is deeper by just, it's deeper inside by just the point where it's recognizable, where if it's any more, it's obvious. If it's any less, it's totally imperceptible. But it's at a point where you're not sure. You look into it, and most people might just think it's empty, and some people get a little queasy or seasick. They're not sure. But the idea of what would happen, like if you put a thought in a box, or it's like a thought displacing the physical world. And it was cut. It was machined. There's a meat to the size of the wall of the box. So I machined it in half an inch. So, things sit on the floor, so you can kind of see under them, because the floors are always a little crooked. So you couldn't, it looks like it's sitting flat on the floor. There's still a little bit of a lip, and then it's cut, and then, it goes in. This work was called Tabletop. And I was moved out of the city and was living in a small town in California, 60 miles northwest of the city, and got a studio in an old broken down hotel in the old lobby. And I was in another bad, sort of funny frame of mind. And at that time I was going through a period where I was smoking a lot of marijuana, which really makes you tired. And I was working on another piece with a still life, and I'd sit on this couch and look at this sculpture, then sort of pass out, and then wake up. And then like Ernie Greer, the guy who bends forks, I would try this kinesthetic, this mind over matter, where you can like move something with your head. And so I'd think, I'd have this like salt shaker on this table, and I'd like wake up, I'd stare at it for like 20 minutes, trying to move it. And I think I moved it, but obviously I didn't. And then at a certain point, I just gave up, and I said, I'll make this sculpture and motorize it, like have it. And I bring these stories up because often in my work, the initial impulse or the idea comes from a very kind of mundane, easy, just a place from my everyday life. And the work of the piece is giving birth to that, or, then how do you formalize that, and how do you actually make a sculpture out of it? So all these pieces are motorized. If you look under this table skirt, it almost looks like a bomb. It's just full of these digital controls and scientific motors that are then further reduced, and they rotate clockwise and counterclockwise at almost imperceptible speeds if it's set up properly. And I wanted to make a work that almost took the viewer a long time to understand or perceive, and as it took a long time for me to sort of make it and think about it. And again, the work was in actually finding the proper objects and how many objects should be in the still life. And but I remember a friend of mine telling me this story about how his father was talking to him, and he realized, he was like 18 or something, that his father was a crook. And he always thought this was his dad, and he said, Jesus, this guy's like a crook. He really is. He's really, a bad person. And it so shattered him that it sort of also, when he looked away at his mother and his sister and the rest of the world, that all seemed different as well. And I wanted, not to make something as grand as that, but like when you looked at this, and we're looking at it for a long time, people think it's just a still life object, and then all of a sudden, they see that something's moving and something else is moving. And I was really interested in that moment, like my friend's moment of recognition, and just in that like split second where you recognize something else is going on, that maybe you look away and the rest of the world seems a little different as well. That might be what you would carry with you, that unstableness. This was called Self-Portrait. And hey, how am I on time?
5 or 10 minutes.
Okay, thanks. This was the first figurative work that I made, and came about from, I was in the department stores a lot looking for these still life objects and whatnot, and started thinking about the, looking at the mannequins and actually thinking of their potential as figuration. And basically what it is, it's like the cheapest quality. It's like a Kmart type mannequin, and I removed the head of it and had the mannequin company cast my head and then genericize it and put it back on. Then I dressed it the way I dress, and it was called Self-Portrait. And I still sort of feel it's like the strongest of my figurative works. I can't really explain it, but to me it's very similar to the rotating circles, sort of like trying to do the most but by doing the least, just coming in and altering a structure. And it has a kind of awkwardness that I feel, and I really feel it's sort of a really good portrait of me in a sense. And we all have different relationships to ourselves, and we put ourselves in different places and often fabricate selves in front of us, and things get very kind of confusing and unstable. And for me, it sort of captures that somehow, and one's your relationship to it. I was trying. I never bought the commodity fetish and that whole the critique in the '80s, and I often enjoyed consumer space and thought a lot about it and its relationship obviously to sex and whatnot. But it was almost I was trying to reclaim consumer space in an erotic way. And I don't mean in a masturbatory way, but in a physical way, like to go back in and take it back for myself. I'll move through these somewhat fast because of time. We want to do the questions. This was called 7.5-ton cube, and it's a solid steel box or solid steel cube that I had machined, then painted white, and it had kind of had an appearance that it weighed about maybe 50, 60 pounds, but it actually weighs an enormous amount. This is a very hard work to see in a slide, but the topology of the table is complete on both sides, in that the vessels are fused. They're plexiglass, and the tabletop is plexiglass. You drop the penny, it would go right through. So there's no bottoms to the vessels. The only one that doesn't flow is the cotton ball one that has a little top that you can open it. But a sculptor's primary medium is space, and when I set up the show at the Whitney, the piece that stuck with me the most was this one, because it was like the only one that I couldn't take out of the show or put in my pocket. It seemed like the whole world, the world space sort of flowed through it, and I kind of learned the most from it. And I think it's the sculpture that shows the most confidence and ease, and it's the one that today I'm thinking the most about. This was called called male mannequin, and as you know, mannequins don't have genitalia, obviously, or male mannequins don't. And I was at this point really trying to think about the potential. This was, I think, from about 1990 or early, and of mannequins as a potential for contemporary figuration. And what I did is I had a Hollywood company, a special effects company, take a mold, a realistic mold of my genitalia, and then these hair people that do for movies, put my pubic hair on it, and it does a few things, and one of the things that was the most obvious was when you first look at it. The genitalia, the penis and balls just seem so pornographic. They seem like sausage or something. In contrast to the mannequin, they're just like, rotting meat or something. They're full of pimples and like, red, brown. It's just like disgusting. And then after a few moments, they seem naturalistic, because you start looking, that in relationship to the mannequin. And, the mannequin's the thing that's the monster, that's horrendous. It's this... There's a you know, the way they're painted, the elongation of you know, there's something called the Sears standard that the mannequin industry uses, and it's a very interesting thing. It's not unlike the Greek idealization, but it's different. Sears put it together in the 50s when the mannequin industry was shifting from paper mache to fiberglass production, and it's sort of an industry run line, and every proportion of, you know, from smallest finger to foot size to length of the hips to the color to how they're painted is all in this sort of mathematical book. You know, mannequins' eyes are painted outward, never inward or never normal, and the reason for that is you can never have eye contact, because if you had eye contact, you couldn't project into it. You know, a mannequin can never smile, because if it smiles, it's, again, you can't project into it, and it's demonic or a demon. You know, so they're really, and still do, kind of interest me in a way. But, you know, there was another kind of quality that it had, that it kind of created constantly a drama. And again, this very interested, not so much, I can talk, and people have talked about my relationship to the work, and I often borrow or find psychological structures inside myself that I link up, or they become ways to, you know, start initiating sculptural structures. I don't really think the work, I'm not interested in you thinking about the work in relationship to, you know, my psychology. I'm more trying to make work that's lively, that interacts with your psychology in a way. And, you know, a friend told me once, watched the piece when it was in a gallery for a while, and, you know, told me these different kinds of reactions it got. And he said a very kind of hip, well-dressed lady, about 40, came in and like walked right up to it in front of, you know, a crowd of people, and, you know, bent over and studied it. It was a kind of drama. You know, she was creating a sort of a social drama, saying like, you know, I'm cool, I'm okay with this, you know. How are we, Rob? Shall I just speed through?
Yeah, just a couple more.
Okay. I'll hit some of the other. This one, it's hard to show. I worked on it for about a year and a half. I was making a drawing, an abstract drawing, that was trying to chart or deal with the impossibility of taking a subjective state and projecting it outward. And I won't go into what the abstract drawing, but it never worked. Eventually, what I did is, you can see I sent the sheet of plate glass to a company that bends carbon shields, and I had them bend it. And then I had the frame maker, you know, miter a frame that was bent. And then I had the wall builder build a wall that had the same bow. But before I did all that, I went to the gallery on LSD and had like a professional photographer take my portrait, you know, in sort of the hallucinatory state. And I was trying to take this subjective state and project it like a wave of expression out into your space. And it was titled Yes, because it was kind of the height of the Reagan era, Nancy Reagan's Just Say No. But more too, because a hallucination is an affirmative and a delusion is a negative, you know. That's what I was thinking. But you know what I'll do, Rob? I'll just run through the images, then I won't really talk too much about them, then we can talk, you and I can talk about it. This was another female mannequin. Again, all these mannequins were articulated just like mannequins, and you know, even the shoes and the fittings were blown up 30%. This was a work called Oh Charlie, 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 ... and it was a sex orgy where I was the only participant. And it being the sort of opposite, I love Brancusi's piece, The Kiss, that block, that two become like one through sex, or, you know, orgasm or whatever. And this, I love that sculpture and believe in it, but this is sort of the other side of the coin, or, you know, my state, like the other is a projection of you. This was No, and it was a portrait of me that's sort of the opposite of Yes. And I made not a mannequin, but a dummy of me, and brought it to a portrait studio and had them photograph it, like, you know, they photograph yearbook pictures. It's called Boy. This was called Family Romance. And this was at the Whitney. It was a toy like Tonka type fire truck that was sort of scaled up to the size of a real truck. This was a poster I made for an art show in Bern in Zurich, and it's about 10 years, or 8, 9 years after I had done the first self-portrait mannequin, and that was my boat, and out at a desert island off the coast of California, Anacapa Island, and I went out and rebought and found all the clothes that I had put on that one, and went out and imitated the sculpture. It's called Puzzle Bottle. And this is called Unpainted Sculpture, and it's a car that was in a really bad wreck, traffic fatality, and I spent a couple of years taking molds off of the car, just totally took it apart, and then made it in another material, in fiberglass, and put it back together. The original kind of premise, or the starting premise of it, was one of the things I was thinking about. I'm very interested in geometry and topology, and I was thinking, I don't believe in ghosts, but if there were ghosts, I was thinking, would they be more apt to haunt the physical substance, a lot of the actual atoms and the material substance of a structure, or would they be more interested in the topology? So if I was to do away with the actual atom per atom,
for more information on the 92nd
of the
Street Y in New
car,
York and all of our programs,
would the ghost follow
please
it
visit us
into
at
this other material that
ny.org.
was kind of honest to its topology or geometry? And we'll leave it there and talk with Rob.